Welcome to the 6th episode of Chronsega, the uglier, slightly deformed younger sibling of Chrontendo. Today we start off in June 1988 and end up in October of the same year. We also have a few Western releases that I think came out in the second half of the year. Possibly. Big changes for the Master System in summer 1988. Suddenly, third-party developers appear. Not original games, but ports of arcade games from Taito, Irem, and Data East. Prior to this episode, the only big third-party name we've seen has been Tecmo. Sega themselves even contribute some decent action platformers. All in all, this is, I'd say, the strongest lineup of games we've seen yet for the Master System. Alright, we start this episode off exactly where we left off in Chronsega Episode 5, on June 2nd, 1988. And this is Lord of Sword, a rather awkward name. However, for the US release, they altered it slightly to Lord of the Sword. So here's the weird thing, remember Kinsaiden, the last game from Chronsega 5, released the exact same day as this? He played a slow, clumsy swordsman who was constantly getting pelted by much faster, more agile enemies. Well, your character in Lord of Sword is virtually the same guy, just sort of given a sword and sorcery makeover. In fact, Kinsaiden and Lord of Sword are very similar games. It's really quite strange that Sega would release two games that are so much alike on the same day. And oh yes, Lord of Sword does give you a pretty much worthless map. It doesn't tell you where you are. How are you supposed to use a map like that? Landau, and yeah, that's the guy's name, Landau, has some basic sword attacks, just like Taito from Kinsaiden. The crouching sword attack in particular look almost identical in both games. Naturally, enemies keep popping up and jumping at you, or often jumping over you, and then coming at you from behind. The fact that so many of them take multiple hits mean you will almost certainly take some damage in any given level. Now, one handy thing you do have is a bow and arrow. This can take out enemies from a distance, however, it actually takes a moment to pull it out and draw back the arrow, so it's really only good for stationary or very slow-moving enemies. Faster enemies would be on top of you before you had a chance to fire off an arrow. You get hints from NPCs such as this tree, or villagers, though the hints aren't really that helpful. Like, where is Nemo, for example? The map isn't labeled. Also, these guys will have a few different lines of dialogue, but you need to exit and re-enter the screen in order for them to speak a second time in order to hear everything they have to say. Okay, so I'll run off some of the peculiar things about Lord of Sword. As mentioned, it's hard to avoid damage, so you will die. But you can continue when this happens. In fact, this only puts you back at the beginning of the level that you died on with all your items intact. The game is built as a bunch of really short levels, so there's no serious consequences of dying as far as I know. Also, certain levels will offer connections to different levels. Here, for example, where you see that hill in the background, walking along the ground off the screen will take you to one level, but climbing up the hill will send you on another path entirely. The structure reminds me a bit of the Nintendo Rambo game. You have a series of horizontally linked screens with occasional intersections that allow you to cross over to a new area. Each village simply consists of a few houses and maybe one NPC that you can talk to. You refill your life bar by re-entering a house multiple times. There are a few items to collect, seen on the top right of the screen, so it has sort of a very simplified Zelda 2 or Castlevania 2 feel to it. As mentioned, Landau controls very sluggishly, and since each of the Master System's two buttons are used to fire a weapon, you have to jump by pressing up. So this guy makes Simon Belmont look sprightly by comparison. This is a boss-like character. You can obtain an item from him. It's a leaf. Not sure what it does. Game doesn't really tell you. So Lord of Sword is an interesting looking, scrolling hack-and-slash type game. I wish it was a little bit better. I liked it less than Kinsaiden even. If your character controlled better and the game gave you a bit more information about the game world, quests, and the items, that sort of thing, it would probably be a bit more fun. Hey, Super Racing! No, not Great Racing. Sega's already dropped the Great label on their games. Cool music though, and there's 2 different modes. We'll get to that in just a sec. Ah, look at the car names. Isn't that cute? So eventually you'll go through all the menus and whatnot and start the game. Each track has 2 parts, a practice run, where your time determines your place in the lineup, and then the real race. Not really sure what the difference between the 2 are. So as you can see, this is another one of those Japanese top-down racing games. We had a couple of these on the Famicom, like Nintendo's Famicom Grand Prix. These things never seem to make it outside of Japan for some reason. And I personally do find them a little annoying. They take some practice. You have to drive the track a couple times before you really sort of get the feel of it, since you can't really see ahead of you at all. The only indication of a turn are those arrows that appear on the ground. So after the practice we have the actual race, 3 laps in this case. As you can see, you can collide with the other cars. I guess you take some sort of damage, since there's a status screen and you can do a pit stop to repair, but I didn't really notice any decrease in my car's performance after the few collisions. Oh yeah, and let's go back to those 2 modes. The BGM mode is the one where there's background music playing. With the other mode, which is called the real mode, there's no music, just sound effects. The controls are pretty simple. One button accelerates, the other changes gears, you just have 2 gears. This is a decent little game, certainly more pleasing to the eye than any of the similar games on the Famicom. It's also, I guess, more pleasing looking than the Master System Outrun, which looked kinda flickery and whatnot. So it's not exactly state-of-the-art, but really not that bad either. Now here's the first in a series of several ports of non-Sega games. Captain Silver. Not exactly a top-tier arcade title, but for the Master System, you take what you can get. Captain Silver is a pirate-themed game, as you could probably guess, but your character is not Captain Silver. Nope, he's the bad guy. You are rather the Guybrush Threepwood-style adventurer who's out to find the legendary treasure of Captain Silver. The original Data East arcade game came out in '87, around the same time as Karnov. Like Karnov, it's a rather difficult ghost and goblin style game. It really isn't that memorable. For the Master System release, the colors were muted quite a bit. The arcade game had some pretty ugly colors, the hit detection was improved, and the entire thing made a bit more enjoyable. First level takes place in a quaint little fairy tale town with werewolves, witches, and pumpkins everywhere. There are various things to pick up, such as the boots make you jump higher. Occasionally fairies will appear. When they do, make sure you grab them, as this will power up your sword to fire projectiles. And this is the key to beating the game, having the powered up sword. It'll make certain parts go much smoother. Some rather hateful platforming is tossed in here and there. Yep, landing in the fountain will kill you. Who knows why? You collect gold as you go along, and when you find a shop you can buy power-ups. The thing that looks like a jar of brown liquid gives you the ability to take one hit without dying. First boss is a rather scary looking witch. With the power-up sword, however, this goes by pretty quickly. And you do also get a great death animation on the witch. Captain Silver is not a terribly long game, 6 levels of the boss at the end of each. The second level is a pirate ship with a pirate boss. But here's the thing, this is the version that was released in Japan and Europe. For the US release, the game was literally cut in half. The US card is 1 meg versus 2. 2 entire levels were removed, almost all the bosses, several types of enemies were cut out. The US Captain Silver is much shorter and much easier. After finishing the original version of the game, this one here, I tried playing the US version, and you can sleepwalk through the thing in like 10-15 minutes. Most of the projectile throwing enemies are gone, so you can just sort of slash your way through the game. Here's one boss missing from the US game. He's difficult because it takes just so many darn hits to kill him. It's easy to jump over his fireballs, but because this just goes on and on, there's a chance of you slipping up as your attention wanes. Here's another level that was much easier in the US version. Watch out for the coconuts. The hit detection I think is somewhat questionable at times, but it's usually in your favor. It's certainly much improved over the arcade game, which is quite unfair at times. Remember, most of Captain Silver's difficulty comes from the fact that there's no life bar. You have one-hit deaths. This makes a few bosses quite difficult. Speaking of which, we have that one boss, the banana guy. The guy who makes you want to throw your controller on the ground and jump on it. To damage this guy, you have to touch him directly with your sword. The projectiles won't hurt him. Only his feet and head are unprotected. So you need to get right up in front of him while he's slowly advancing and hitting at you with a flail. He'll raise his arm when he does a high flail attack, but the low attacks are much more unexpected. And he'll corner you at the edge of the screen, and you can't jump over him. If you had a life bar, he would just be pretty easy, but the fact that one mistake kills you makes him really like an exercise in frustration. I wouldn't call it a game breaker, but you'll like Captain Silver a lot less because of this one guy. So after some platforming, which is thankfully rare in this game, you encounter Captain Silver himself. He's a bit tricky because he throws very fast projectiles at you, and if you don't plan accordingly, you can get trapped by him at the edge of the screen. You need to jump over the fireballs and land close enough to run underneath him the next time he jumps. Finally, we get the actual treasure of Captain Silver, some enormous rings and gold coins. Then you get an illustrated epilogue, once again missing from the US release. So I'd say Captain Silver falls into the surprisingly enjoyable category. It's much better than the Master System Rygar, and I found it more fun than Lord of the Sword. While it can't compare to some of the better NES games like Contra, Bionic Commando, in terms of slickness, on the Master System this is one of the better games. Certainly an improvement over the arcade game, and better than the Famicom port, which we'll encounter a few episodes from now. Now this is surprising. All of a sudden Sega is getting ports of non-Sega arcade games. This is Final Bubble Bobble, first Taito developed game on the Master System, though Sega actually published it. Despite the weird name, it's just a regular port of good old Bubble Bobble. Even has a little arcade-style demo mode. This was also released in Europe under the name Bubble Bobble and in Brazil as Dragon Maze, not released in the US. As we know, this originally hit arcades in 1986, sort of a deliberately old-school style video game at a time when arcade games were getting more and more elaborate. An NES port came out in Japan for 1987, so let's do sort of like a comparison here. When we fire up the NES version, one thing we'll notice is that the intro is missing the background stars. Colors are a little off for one. The enemies look a little weird when they get trapped in the bubbles. And by comparison, the Master System version has brighter colors and more detail in the sprites. It's not quite pixel perfect, but it's definitely more accurate than the Nintendo version, and it just somehow feels a bit more like the arcade game. I'm not really sure why this never came out in the US. I assume it was due to Nintendo of America's restrictions regarding games appearing on competing platforms. Now unfortunately for Japanese Master System owners, this was the only Taito game released for the console in that territory. It might seem a bit odd, as the Master System release schedule in Japan seems pretty robust at this point. 5 games came out in July 1988, but in reality, the system was getting ready to wind up. The Japanese Master System was getting ready to have one last blaze of glory in fall 1988, whereas in the West, it was actually starting to pick up a bit. We actually have another Taito game coming up soon that was only released in the West, never came out in Japan. So anyway, as for Final Bubble Bobble, it's definitely the better of the 2 home versions we've seen so far. Next up, we have a bit of a change of pace with Megumi Rescue. That means Fire Brigade Rescue. Note the credit to ICOM and the reprogrammed game copyrighted to Sega credit. Generally, this appears on games that were ported from another system, implying that this originally appeared on a different platform. It certainly feels like an old-school arcade game, but if this was originally an arcade title, I've never heard of it. It does bear a lot of similarity to a Western computer game called Rescue Squad, which was from Muse, the same guys who did the first Castlevania game. But there's no real connection between that game and this one. It's probably just a coincidence or a case of inspiration. So anyway, Megumi Rescue is another game in the old Breakout Kaboom tradition. It uses the Master System rotary paddle controller to move the firefighters on the ground. This will bounce up one of your firefighters in the air. The object is to grab onto a window. If the window is occupied by a person, then you grab a hold of them and jump down and rescue them. And of course, you need to catch the people when they land. Occasionally you'll find objects other than people in the windows, such as the helicopter, which seems to automatically complete the level for you. It even gives you access to a silly little bonus round where you try to catch falling objects. After this, you move on to another building. I believe there are 30 buildings in all, and each are unique in terms of design and layout. There's all kinds of things to find in the buildings that'll give you extra points. Money, safes full of valuables. There's a gold key which unleashes a torrent of water onto the building, thus apparently saving everyone. According to a review I read of this game, there's an object which will quote-unquote nuke the building, thus ending the level. I'm not sure if this refers to the helicopter or something else. What looks like a bomb is shot into the building at the end of each level, for example when the helicopter finishes a level for you. I'm not sure if that's what the reviewer was referring to, or if there actually is some kind of nuclear device, which I haven't found. You're also up against a time limit as the fire spreads and people start jumping. You yourself can catch on fire and die, of course. Also landing on the hard concrete will kill you. So it's a pretty fun game. Despite its simplicity, it's actually a pretty neat idea for a Kaboom clone. And the last game of July is another arcade port, Thunderblade. This does not have a very good reputation nowadays, and for good reason, as we'll see. We've seen a handful of shoot-'em-ups on the Master System, but nothing too terribly exciting. Thunderblade isn't going to change that because it's actually pretty subpar. See, here's the thing. The arcade game was the latest in Sega's series of 3D superscaler games. They were often found in those super awesome deluxe cabinets. But even when you played on a regular cabinet, Thunderblade was really cool because it had this very impressive sprite-based 3D effect. It used stacked sprites to make passing buildings look like they were actually in 3D. It alternated between these sort of top-down and first-person viewpoints. You had enemies flying towards you, missiles shooting everywhere, huge explosions. Like so many other of Sega's arcade games, it was technically very impressive. And the Master System version? Well, no, not so much. Obviously all the stacked sprites and 3D effects have been pretty much removed. Your helicopter can no longer change its altitude. You have two weapons, a machine gun and missiles, which are used to take out surface enemies, and both are incredibly boring looking. So it boils down to being like a repetitive and dull shoot-'em-up. First-person sections look maybe a little nicer, but still some rather crude attempts were made in trying to replicate the look of the arcade game. Still, the first-person levels are pretty boring. Most aircraft just line up to be shot and then fly away harmlessly. Alternately, when you're dealing with the tanks, they shoot these projectiles that fly around like weird curved paths and are very hard to dodge. You have to move all over trying to survive. Here's this rather boring boss battle where you fly over an aircraft and then shoot it down. Or maybe it's a missile or something, I'm really not sure. So Thunderblade is stuck in a no man's land. Sega couldn't replicate the arcade game's visual excitement, and they chose not to add anything that might make the console version fun, like interesting enemies or power-ups. So it's both boring and frustrating at the same time. It's rather another failed attempt by Sega to bring one of their arcade games into the home. Alright, let's switch gears for a second here and examine a few more non-Japanese releases. Games that were released only in the Americas or Europe. We'll start with Rastan, which I think was released in the US in the second half of 1988. Rastan is a classic sword and sorcery type game, much like Lord of Sword, only more fun. Oh look, I got a piece of armor here. They're randomly dropped. They add to your defense. The object is pretty simple. Swing your sword, walk forward, and kill everything that moves. Rastan, like Bubble Bobble, was a Taito arcade game. Its protagonist was clearly based on Conan the Barbarian, and the game was naturally pretty violent. Enemies would explode in fountains of gore when killed. Unlike Arthur from Ghosts and Goblins, Rastan was a rugged dude, with a life bar represented by a realistic-looking human heart. A fun game, and one that made its way to the Master System with all the blood intact. But the game has been changed quite a bit, much less fast-paced with fewer enemies. In other words, it's gone from being a quarter gobbler to a more console-friendly game. There are 7 levels, each starts outdoors, and then move on to a castle of some sort, then a boss battle. Here's the first boss right here, some sort of half-monster, half-horse dude. None of the bosses are too terribly difficult to kill. Now in Rastan you'll encounter a constant stream of enemies, but those aren't really your biggest problem. No, that would be the environment. Rastan is very vulnerable to bodies of water, and his jump is a bit difficult to control, and that means you'll land in the water a lot. Furthermore, inside the castle there's quite a few lava pits and moving spikes and that sort of thing. Some jumping challenges seem more suited for Mega Man than for the big bulky Rastan. His high jump, which is activated by pressing the upper diagonals on the D-pad, is a bit tricky to pull off, and I found myself falling on spikes pretty frequently. Even worse, you can't control Rastan in mid-jump, making moments like this a little unfair. If you try to jump and land on one of those platforms, you'll just sail right over. From what I can tell, you simply can't land on them when you're in the water. To add insult to injury, Rastan freezes for a second whenever he takes damage. Fortunately, you do have a wall bounce move to help you in situations like this, but for me at least, it always felt like I was sort of struggling a bit with the controls, something you never experience in a Mario or a Mega Man game. As I mentioned, bosses are usually not that tough. Your best friend for many of these encounters is a downward sword thrust used in mid-jump. It's actually pretty similar to the attack Link had in Zelda 2. As the game progresses, you'll pass through a number of different environments. Mountains, forests, fiery volcanoes. The volcano level has the best boss, a huge red multi-sprite dragon. You need to kill this guy by hitting him on the head, common theme for most of Rastan's bosses. Now things get a little sadistic in the last level, which is like a labyrinth-style castle. Then you finally get to the last boss, which is a smaller red dragon. It's actually a bit disappointing. They should have placed this guy in the second to last dungeon and then used the big dragon as the final boss, but oh well. So after taking care of the last boss, you get a little epilogue that sort of tells you that Rastan was rescuing a princess. Well, that's original. This is actually a completely different story than the arcade game, by the way. Though, in an unusual touch, Rastan, I guess suffering from some sort of low self-esteem, slinks away from the princess who loves him, since he doesn't deserve her. Oh yeah, and take a look, the name of the kingdom is Chamois, or maybe that's Chamois. So I'd call Rastan a pretty successful arcade conversion. Certainly it's superior to most of Sega's similar efforts, or Rygar for the Master System. Rastan's clumsy jumping results in most of the frustration, but there aren't any really terrible situations that you can't live with, so it's definitely worth your time. Here's our third US and Europe only game. It's Shanghai, a game we've seen before. However, I think this is the only version to have an animated title screen, and you finally get to find out which of those two guys wins the game. It seems Sega was responsible for this ported version, the umpteenth port of this old computer classic. It's also got in-game instructions. Very nice. And this is one mellow jam. I could totally listen to this music on a rainy day. So yeah, this is the third time we've seen Shanghai. It already turned up in Chrontendo episode 29 and Chronturbo episode 1. It was a launch game for the PC Engine in Japan. Which means that, yes, Shanghai is the first game to be released on all three platforms, Master System, Famicom, and PC Engine. Not many games get that honor. Another one that springs to mind is Falcom's Ease. So we all know how to play this game, right? You select a matching pair of tiles to remove them. The object is to clear all the tiles. As usual, there's quite a few menu options. Like, is that music breaking your concentration? Then change it. You can even turn it off completely. You can also reverse moves, use various cheats, or hints, if you want to call them that. Naturally, I got stuck with no more possible moves. So is this as good as the PC Engine version? Well, maybe. The PC Engine Shanghai has easier to read tiles, so I guess the prize goes to Hudson. Here's our next Western-only release, Vigilante, and once again it's taken from a non-Sega arcade game. The cute little intro sort of vaguely describes the situation. Gangs have taken over the town. And then unfortunately, Sega screws up and changes the wording on this part right here. Rogues have taken Maria. Let's take a look at the arcade Vigilante from Irem, which came out in 1987, despite the 88 copyright. The skinheads have taken Madonna hostage. Now that is a beat-em-up plot right there. You take the law into your own hands. If the cops get involved, they'll just send the criminals through the namby-pamby legal system. It's better just to kill everybody with your own bare hands, or even better, with nunchucks. Vigilante was a pre-Double Dragon style beat-em-up, sort of a follow-up to Irem's Kung Fu. It's not a great game, but serviceable. The Master System version has one major problem. These guys, yeah, the guys with the green pants and white shirts, they'll run up and choke you, draining your health until you shake them off. In the arcade game, you could hit them just like any other enemy. Here they pretty much ignore your punches and kicks about 75% of the time. The only way to guarantee you'll knock these guys down before they reach you is with these nunchucks. When you pick up the nunchucks, for God's sake, don't lose them. The signage and billboards in the background are quite strange. Several of them say Maria's name. Is she a popular attraction in town? Is she your girlfriend, little sister? Based on the way she's dressed in the cutscene, she looks to be about 10 years old. We have the first boss coming up here. Once again, he's one of those guys you just sort of duck down and punch him in the nuts over and over again. So, okay, well, Vigilante is actually really simple, even by 1987 beat-em-up standards. You don't have any fancy moves, really. Most enemies are taken out easily with a couple punches. It's just those damn chokehold guys. If you don't have the nunchucks, try to jump over them and they'll just pass right by you. I don't know why Sega made them so hard to hit. Most of the time your blow seems to connect visually, but they just pass right through it and grab you. It's actually quite irritating. It's a bit of a shame because otherwise Vigilante would be a reasonable, fun, mindless little game. Definitely better than Sega's own My Hero, but as it is, this is a game that's really most likely just to piss you off. Speaking of things we've seen before, it's another Rambo game, making this the third Rambo game we've come across in the Chron series. And guess what? There's gonna be more in the future. Rambo 3 is named after the movie, released in May of 1988. Now, you might recall there was a similar Rambo 3 arcade game from Taito that was released around the same time. these two games are unconnected, despite having sort of very similar gameplay. The Master System Rambo 3 was clearly inspired by Operation Wolf. The manual claims the game depicts Rambo rescuing Troutman from a Soviet base in Afghanistan, but I mean, come on. Do any of the guys in this game look like Soviet Army to you? Sure looks to me like this was designed as some sort of generic light gun shooter, and the Rambo license was added at the last moment. Supposedly the game is very short. I don't know, because I can only last a few minutes myself. Unlike a lot of these sorts of games, multiple enemies appear at the same time and start shooting at you, meaning there's pretty much no way you can take them all out at once, and you're going to be slowly taking damage. I'd say that memorization is probably the key to getting very far in Rambo 3. We have seen some decent games today, but Rambo 3 goes definitely to the bottom of the pile. Alright, we're back to the Japanese release schedule, and August 1988 with Golvellius, Valley of Doom, perhaps the big game this episode. You can tell it's going to be good by the awesome music, and the name Compile in the credits. The game starts off with a nice illustrated cutscene. It involves a sick king, a missing princess, and a wandering green-haired hero who wears a miniskirt. Oh no, never mind, that's a tunic. So does this seem sort of Zelda-inspired to you? Yeah, well, Golvellius is definitely a Zelda clone. Oddly, this lady says he's empty-handed and gives him a sword, but he clearly had a sword in the opening cutscene. What's going on here, Compile? Now the game starts up, and wow, look at you go! Let me tell you, if you've played Lord of Sword, Rastan, Captain Silver, and then this game, it's like a breath of fresh air. Suddenly you can run quickly and jump. I mean, holy cow, this guy can move. This is the first of several side-scrolling sequences, and the first giant red snake you'll encounter, that throw either smaller snakes or fireballs at you. Then you emerge onto the overworld, and at this point, Golvellius' debt to Zelda becomes very clear. You have a grid of interconnected screens. When you enter a new screen, monsters start appearing, which you can kill for money. Killing a few monsters will often cause a hole in the ground to appear. Well, let's call it a cave. Inside you will meet someone, like Randar, who is sort of Compile's mascot. You might remember him in Guardian Legend. In this game he refills your health for 150 gold. Also, fairies. They give you hints and maybe spout some gibberish. This old lady will sell you stuff, for example, life potions to increase your maximum health. They function sort of like the tanks in Metroid. By the time we've reached the end of the game, that health box up in the upper right corner there will be completely full. Now before we go any further, let's just actually go back a step. Golvellius was originally a Japanese computer game released in 1987 on the MSX. Pak Fujishima was the game designer. He also did the original Gartic game. The game world and layout and graphics were completely different than the Master System version, but it's still basically the same game. Then in 1988, Compile re-released it in an enhanced version for the MSX2. This game had an introduction giving a bit of backstory, and the game starts in the village surrounding the castle, and there's some NPCs and fetch quests before you enter the main overworld. The graphics for the monsters are quite a bit different, but some graphics, like the old ladies, are identical to the Master System version. According to one Japanese site, this came out on August 2nd, about 12 days before the Master System version. I assume that Compile worked on both versions at the same time. Anyway, much like Zelda, your main objective is to find a series of dungeons, though in Golvellius, these are either side-scrolling dungeons, like we saw earlier, or vertical dungeons with forced scrolling, like here. At the end of each dungeon you'll encounter a boss battle. Defeating each boss does a few things. It refills your health and money to the maximum, and it opens a door to a cave where an old lady is selling crystals, and it unlocks the next area. In order to complete the game, you need to buy all 7 crystals, one for each boss. You see, Golvellius is more linear than Zelda. You need to unlock each of the 7 areas one at a time. I wouldn't call them levels because you can move between any of the unlocked areas at any time, and you will need to backtrack in points. It's sort of vaguely Metroidvania-like, I guess. Oh yeah, and here's what I mean by fairies spouting gibberish. A lot of times they actually don't really give any helpful hints at all. Every screen, or almost every screen, has a hidden hole, but not all of them are actually worth going into. One cool thing about Golvellius, the old ladies. When you try to buy an item without enough cash, you'll get a string of insults hurled at you. It's almost always worth trying to buy something you can't afford just to see what the old lady will say. All told, there are 7 areas and 8 bosses. Most of the bosses are relatively easy, like this giant hermit crab. Probably the toughest parts are actually the overworld sections. Unlike Zelda, where overworld enemies are pretty easy to kill, Golvellius has infinitely respawning enemies, many of which are much faster than you, flying enemies especially. They tend to come at you from multiple directions at once, and it will be impossible to dispose of all of these guys without taking some damage. If you're not trying to find a hidden cave or earn money, it actually makes more sense to enter and exit a screen as quickly as possible, that way you don't get hit by flying enemies. The 3rd level, the graveyard level, is full of very dangerous guys that can wear down your health bar very quickly, so the overworld's a bit more intense than Zelda. Throughout the game you'll buy expensive, yet very helpful equipment, such as better swords, shields, boots, that sort of thing. Other than equipment and health potions, you also need Bibles. These are for some reason increase the maximum amount of cash you can carry. Without Bibles, you won't be able to collect enough cash to buy most of the items. If you collect all the upgrades, at the end of the game you'll be able to carry about 100,000 gold and have about 20 life tanks. Oh yeah, and the music changes when you get new swords. Now, Golvellius does screw with the players just a bit. In the dungeons you can't scroll backwards. Often you are forced to pick a path out of several choices, and some of the choices result in dead ends. If you do get stuck in such a dead end, you'll be forced to exit the dungeon and then start all over again. So a bit of memorization, or luck, is required. Other than better swords, you need to buy such items such as boots that allow you to walk on water, and later, boots that allow you to walk over almost anything. These boots will open up some previously inaccessible but important areas, and also allow you to access shortcuts between the different areas. One cool thing about the water boots, you can stand on the water where land enemies can't reach you, and easily pick them off without fear of reprisal. Good for grinding gold. You'll also find a ring which allows you to destroy certain rocks. Again, this is required to advance at a certain point. You learn about almost all these things from the cryptic Zelda-like hints the fairies give. The pendant increases your defense. Unfortunately, all this stuff costs a lot of money, which means you have to kill lots of enemies for gold over and over again. Something else that's not very cool is this boss. Most bosses are pretty easy. This one takes way too long to kill. You have to run up and hit them like a million times before they die. Because they're so quick, this is actually quite a pain, and the fight is way too long, dangerous, and grueling. We're actually getting pretty near the end here. I found some boots that allow me to walk over trees. Oddly, the game starts out in a desert-like environment, then moves you to a rather gloomy graveyard area, but the last 2 levels are rather pleasant-looking forest levels. Usually the last levels in these sorts of games are like, scary Mount Doom, or, type part of the game world. There's a cool but pretty easy boss. He or she is a headbanger, I guess. The boss moves at the same speed that you do, so they can follow you around doing constant damage if you're not careful. Eventually you'll find Golvellius' lair, hidden by this dead tree. The final level is a side-scrolling level with multiple giant snakes, and then Golvellius himself. It helps to have this special herb that will refill your life bar when it runs out, sort of giving you like an extra instant life. The one thing I do wish is that enemies gave some sort of visual clue when you did damage to them. As it is, there's only like a little annoying sound effect when you successfully, strike them with your sword. Now once you've defeated Golvellius, then you've beaten the game. However, the ending, as told through a cutscene, is a little unusual by video game standards. You rescue the princess, of course, but the 7 crystals you've been collecting will bring Golvellius back to life. Since he's no longer possessed by demons or whatever, he decides to join you in your further adventures, which I guess set up a sequel that never really happened. There was a sort of sequel made, but it was a goofy cooking-themed game. Certainly, Golvellius outclasses any Zelda clones we've seen on the Famicom. It's far better looking than Zelda itself, though it lacks the creativity and originality of Legend of Zelda, and it's not without its flaws. This is definitely one of the better Master System games we've seen so far. If you like Compile's Guardian Legend, I would seriously recommend Golvellius. Hey, it's Shinobi, a game about shinobis, also known as ninjas, though literally, shinobi means stealth. See this guy on the title screen? That's a stealthy looking ninja. You know who's not stealthy? Joe Musashi, who walks around in plain sight where everyone can see him and doesn't even bother putting on his ninja mask. The bottom line, Joe is more about kicking ass rather than stealth. He's only slightly less obvious than Bill and Lance from Contra. Now if you thought ninjas were assassins or something, you're wrong. Joe is here to rescue kidnapped children. Ninjas are just like Godzilla. They're all about helping the children. Now obviously this is a port of Sega's 1987 arcade game. Shinobi was nothing at all like Sega's loud, flashy, superscaler games. This was a much less hectic side-scrolling action game that greatly resembled Namco's Rolling Thunder, and was notable for, among other things, one of the enemies being clearly based on Spider-Man. The Master System game changes it up quite a bit. It gives you a life bar, for example. And it also makes you play these horrendous mini-games between levels. You have to shoot ninjas before they reach you. It's really hard. Beating this will grant you some ninja magic. Level 2 features both the Andy Warhol-esque posters of Marilyn Monroe and the Spider-Man enemy. Now there are 5 areas, each broken down into a few levels each. At the end of each area is a boss, a gigantic ninja-looking dude in this case. You need to hit him in the face while avoiding his fireballs. The second boss, called Black Turtle, is, get this, a helicopter. Or maybe a guy who's flying the helicopter, though your wanted sheet actually shows the helicopter, not the guy. Which doesn't really make much sense. I mean, helicopters are mass-produced. There's gotta be 1,000 other helicopters out there just like this one. Each level changes the environments quite a bit, and new enemies appear on a regular basis. As you may have noticed, most levels feature 2 floors. Holding up or down on the D-pad while you jump will cause you to switch floors. So if an enemy is hiding behind a crate or something, you might be able to switch floors and come around behind him. One thing I love is when you get the kids, they go flying off diagonally through the air, like it kicked them off screen or something. And by the way, rescuing the kids is actually optional, but doing so will get you bonuses, such as refilling your life bar, extending your life bar, getting better weapons, and so on. And trust me, you will need the extended life bar in this game. This boss, for example, rather irritating. I think if you have the default shurikens, he's pretty much impossible to defeat. You just can't throw him fast enough, so you need to have a powered up weapon here. It's a 2-part boss. The second part is his face, which throws bouncy fireballs at you. A piece of cake if you stand right in front of him. After this, things start to get a little hairy, when crazy flying ninjas start jumping out of nowhere at you, which raises the obvious question, Joe Musashi is a ninja, why can't he jump around like this? Why can't he do crazy surprise attacks? Now unfortunately the game does have just sort of one particular moment that kind of brings the game down. Shinobi's moment of tomfoolery is right here, this jump. Let's try that again. Here we go. Shoot the bad guy first. I was right on the edge when I jumped. Yeah, it seems like you literally have to be standing on the last pixel on that platform in order to make the jump. Thanks, Sega, for trying to kill us with one stupid jump like that. There isn't really much difficult platforming in this game, though there are a few Ninja Gaiden-esque moments of enemies hitting you midair and knocking you into a bottomless pit. Oh, now this boss, a giant samurai, is called Lobster, because he's red, I guess. Beating him's all a matter of timing. You need to shoot him when his sword is lowered a bit. You kind of sort of need to get in the groove when fighting this guy. Now on the final level, Sega turns up the heat a bit. You start out getting pummeled by surprising flying ninjas coming from every direction. Memorization, or advancing very slowly, is the key here. In general though, Shinobi is best played cautiously. You can't just rush in, or you'll take too many bullets in the face. Now if you do manage to make it to the last level alive, I recommend playing very carefully, rescuing all the kids to get a health refill, so that you can reach the final boss with a relatively full health bar. Now the masked ninja boss is sometimes considered difficult because you have to use specific tactics to defeat each form. First time you're playing, you're going to have no idea what to do, because these tactics are really not very obvious. If you don't know what you're doing, you're going to get killed real quick. So for his first form, you need to hit him in the approximately 1/20th of a second that his shield is down. Once again, it's all a matter of timing. When he switches to Hurricane form, use a melee attack right when he reaches you. For his Shadow Double form, hit him right when he touches the ground. And then in his final Pile Driver attack, trap him between you and the wall and just keep pummeling him. It's a tough battle, and a little cruel because you really can't mess up more than a couple times without dying. But finally you'll persevere, defeat the Masked Ninja, rescue the kids, and are finished with the game. And now you finally get to see the end of Shinobi. I see. Well, screw you too, Sega. We've almost reached the end here, folks. Lightning strikes a temple. Very ominous. Hey, this looks familiar. Why, in fact, this is Kujaku-O. If you saw Chrontendo 36, then you know we saw this game, better known in the West as Spellcaster. In the US it got a more boring title screen. The Master System Kujaku-O came out in August, and the Famicom one came out in September, so Chronsega and Chrontendo are right about lined up now, so both series have reached early fall 1988. And remember, of course, there was also an MSX release as well. All the versions start out the same, with the Peacock King talking to this guy about the attack on the temple, and they follow the same plot, since they were based on a manga. But the Famicom and MSX games were adventure games with RPG turn-based battles. However, someone, presumably Sega, heavily reworked the game for the Master System, and the adventure game interface is really only used at certain points. Oh, and this is funny, if you waste time talking to this guy, he'll call you an idiot and tell you to get out. Well, anyway, huge chunks have been ripped out of the original game and replaced with side-scrolling action sequences, so it feels a bit more like Shinobi or Rastan. I don't know if any major changes were made for the US version. The most obvious thing is the protagonist's outfit. In the Japanese game, he wore like this flowing robe thing. In the US game, it was obviously altered to look more like a Kung Fu Master type outfit. So at the end of each action sequence, you reach your destination, usually a temple, and then you get a little bit of adventure gaming. Mostly this consists of you talking to people, and these scenes help advance the plot. Izumo, that's a famous temple in Japan. Shouldn't this guy know that? He's a Japanese guy who hangs out in temples after all. So you talk to this guy, then you head back, talk to the old guy some more. He'll tell you Izumo's a temple, then you head to Izumo, then more side-scrolling sequences. At the temple, you find a bad guy, and then you get a boss fight. After you defeat him, he'll provide some exposition, then you head back to the old guy, etc. And that's sort of how the game goes, at least for the first half. Unfortunately, the adventure game segments aren't really any better here than they were in the Famicom game. In fact, maybe they're worse. It's mostly a matter of looking, talking, and occasionally picking up or using an item, but the game can be stubbornly illogical at times. Take some spaghetti, the guy says. Sure. You hit take, and there's nothing to take. I'll look again. Yeah, spaghetti's still there. He still wants me to take it. Why can't I pick it up? And the action sequences aren't as polished as they could be. Like, hey, how did I miss that platform? I guess if the back of your heel on one leg is on the edge of a platform, you'll just magically fall right through the platform. Also, enemies can respawn like way too quick. Look at this, didn't you have time to like walk past where that orange thing was? And he reappears like a second after I shot it. I bet this enemy came straight out of the manga version. Just look at the guy. So about the spells, you have the same spells as in the Famicom game, and they can be used in the action sections. Udo unleashes a powerful fireball. That's what I'll use to take out this guy when I get a chance. The magic can be a little bit awkward to use. You need to hold down the button and then squat. If an enemy hits you while you're trying to squat, this cancels the magic attack. Oh, and by the way, the strength up there, that is your life bar or your hit points, and ENGY is your magic points. Here's another rage-inducing moment here. There's stuff on the ground, but when you look, the game tells you there's nothing strange there. So let's look at that sword that looks like the famous Japanese 7-branched sword. Probably important, so we better take that. But you try, and there's nothing to take. Well, yes there is. The sword. Why can't I pick up the sword? And that's how this game tends to go. If you're wondering, you have to look at the sword a second time before the game will let you pick it up, for some mysterious reason. So the adventure game parts are really infuriating. The side-scrolling parts are pretty repetitive. You go to like 5 temples in a row, and they're all pretty similar. A couple are pretty much identical. Later, the game does mix it up a bit. You have to rescue a girl from a sea monster. But the game gives you no clues as to how to do this. It involves casting a series of 3 spells, but since the game gives you no in-game descriptions of what your spells do, there's really no way to figure this out unless you have a manual or a walkthrough. The Spellcaster isn't a terrible game. It plays like a side-scrolling action game with interactive cutscenes between levels. This gives it much more plot than most similar games, but the execution of both the adventure and the action sequences really don't quite live up to the concept. Only one game released in Japan in September, and it's a baseball game, Nekyu Koshien, or Hot Pitch Koshien. Koshien Stadium is where the high school baseball tournaments take place, so I guess this is a high school baseball game. You choose your name and team, number of players, level, and then you get started. Now I was a little intrigued because I noticed that on SMS Power's entry for this game, they called it maybe the best baseball game for the system. Which sounds pretty good until you realize there really aren't that many baseball games on the Master System. But it still is a pretty good game. Pitching controls are standard, but one nice touch is the outfielder control. They actually start running towards the ball automatically, which means you have a good chance of actually catching a fly ball. And throwing a ball works just about like you would expect. Batting is once again a simple matter of pressing the button. Actually making contact with the ball isn't too difficult, unlike some games, and I actually got a couple good hits in. Also, back when we were discussing Super Real Baseball for Chrontendo, I complained about that horrible background ruckus in every single baseball game, and a commenter informed me it was supposed to represent these cheer squads, called Oenden. They make an appearance in this game actually. You can see them beating on the taiko drums. They look like high school kids here. There's also even dancing cats in one scene. So this game has responsive controls, no obvious gameplay flaws that I encountered, has these cute little animated cutscenes between various plays. It's certainly not the best looking baseball game ever, but I found it to be pretty enjoyable. Our last game this episode, and the first game of October, is once again a port of an arcade classic. And unlike a number of games we've seen this episode, the Master System R-Type achieves considerable fidelity to the source material. In terms of layout, gameplay, weapons, enemy types, that sort of thing, the Master System R-Type is virtually identical to the arcade game. Oh sure, the music is a bit tinny and the graphics don't look quite as nice, but this would be extremely impressive if it weren't for one little thing. A few months prior, R-Type was released on the PC Engine, the Japanese TurboGrafx 16. This version was the most impressive arcade-to-console conversion ever at this point. The fact that pretty much perfect home version of R-Type already existed makes the Master System game look not quite so special. Which is a shame because after the botched ports of Thunderblade, Vigilante, and the like, R-Type is a big step up, certainly well beyond what could have been achieved on the Famicom. It does play a little differently than the arcade game in some subtle ways that are kind of hard to pinpoint. I died a few times on this level where I normally wouldn't have in something like the PC Engine version. It just felt a little bit different in spots, and when the game tries to pull off a big explosion or impressive effect, the Master System really can't do it without the game getting all flickery and glitchy looking. Here's one special thing about this version, a hidden bonus level. You can reach it from level 4. Unfortunately, it's not very exciting. There are some weird enemies that look kind of like green raw chickens. And in a huge mistake, the boss doesn't flash when you hit him, so it looked like you're not doing any damage. I assume Sega was responsible for the Master System version, maybe they designed this new level. It just doesn't impress you the way the other levels do. Still, it's a very commendable release for the Master System, if only the PC Engine's R-Type wasn't there to steal all the glory. Well, there we go. Thus ends the golden age of the Master System. Not that there weren't any more good games on the way, but after this, the Master System sort of finds itself overshadowed by its 16-bit sibling. Chronsega 7 will see the console stop releasing games in Japan entirely, and its overall release schedule will slow down quite a bit. Now there's still going to be plenty of good exclusive titles, so don't quite count out the Master System yet.